I was born into a house where love was a word never spoken. My parents were cold, distant, and seemingly indifferent to my existence. For 15 years I lived under the weight of their contempt, never quite understanding what I had done to earn their hatred. Every day felt like a battle for survival, not just against the physical hardships but against the emotional desolation that consumed me. I became skilled at hiding my pain, burying it deep inside where it couldn't be seen. But the longing for freedom grew stronger with each passing year. I began to dream of escape, of a life where I could finally breathe without the oppressive weight of their disdain. I planned for months, waiting for the perfect moment to slip away unnoticed. That moment came one cold, moonless night. I packed what little I had and tiptoed through the house, the floorboards creaking under my cautious steps. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the door. I could almost taste the freedom just beyond it. But as I stepped out into the night, I heard a voice, low and sharp, call my name. It was my neighbor, Mr. Harris, standing on his porch, his silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of his porch light. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I shivered, not just from the chill in the air, but from the fear that gripped me. Mr. Harris was an old man, with a reputation for being nosy. He had lived in the neighborhood for as long as I could remember, always watching, always knowing more than he let on. I didn't move, hoping he might dismiss it as a trick of the night and go back inside. But he didn't. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto mine. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as Mr. Harris slowly approached. The cricket's song faded into the background, replaced by the thumping of my heart. My mind raced, searching for an excuse, a reason for being outside at such an hour. But nothing came. I was caught, and I knew it. "Where are you going at this time of night?" he asked, his voice low but firm. I hesitated, unsure whether to lie or to beg for help. The truth felt too dangerous, yet lying might make things worse. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Just getting some air," I stammered, though the tremble in my voice betrayed me. Mr. Harris didn't seem convinced. His gaze flicked to the small bag clutched in my hand, then back to my face. "With a bag?" he asked, one eyebrow raising in suspicion. I couldn't think of a response fast enough, and the silence hung heavy between us. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of a dog barking. It felt like the world was closing in on me. Each passing second a reminder of how close I was to losing the little freedom I had managed to grab. Mr. Harris sighed, a sound filled with a mix of weariness and something else I couldn't quite place. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" he finally said, his voice softer now, almost understanding. My eyes widened in shock. How could he have known? I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. There was no point in lying anymore. I nodded, my shoulders slumping under the weight of my admission. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked, taking another step closer. I blinked, unsure how to respond. Help? The concept was foreign to me. I had spent so many years alone, believing no one would ever care enough to offer assistance. The idea that someone might have noticed my suffering, might have been willing to intervene, seemed impossible. "I didn't think anyone would," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mr. Harris's expression softened, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that wasn't suspicion or judgment. It was compassion, a look I had rarely seen directed at me. He glanced back at his house, then back at me, as if weighing a decision. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said finally. "Come inside. Let's talk this through." I hesitated, torn between the instinct to run and the small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone cared. But before I could decide, I heard a noise behind me, a door creaking open followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. My father was standing in the doorway, his shadow stretching out across the lawn. His face was unreadable, but the tension in his posture told me everything I needed to know. He had heard everything. The escape plan that I'd had nurtured for so long had crumbled to dust in an instant. The chance for freedom slipped away, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling of inevitability. Mr. Harris glanced between me and my father, his expression hardening as he took a step forward, positioning himself slightly in front of me. "Evening, Mr. Thompson," he greeted, his voice polite but firm. My father didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in them. Anger, fear, regret. I couldn't tell, but then it was gone, replaced by the usual mask of indifference. "Your daughter was just about to come back inside," Mr. Harris said, his tone carefully neutral. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a small challenge. My father's gaze shifted to Mr. Harris, and the tension between them crackled in the air. "She's my daughter," he said, his voice low and edged with warning. "This is none of your business. She's a child and she's clearly scared." Mr. Harris countered, his tone growing sharper. "That makes it my business." My father took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface, ready to explode. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows and escape this confrontation, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. Just when I thought the situation would spiral out of control, Mr. Harris spoke again, his voice calm but unyielding. "We can call the police and let them sort this out," he said, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. My father's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might actually attack Mr. Harris. But then, as if realizing the futility of the situation, he took a step back. "Fine," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Do what you want." Without another word, he turned and stormed back into the house, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that echoed through the quiet night. Mr. Harris let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he turned back to me. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now. I nodded numbly, the shock of what had just happened making it hard to process. I was free for now, but the reality of my situation was starting to sink in. I couldn't go back home, not after this. But where would I go? What would I do? "Come on," Mr. Harris said, gently guiding me toward his house. "You can stay here tonight, we'll figure things out in the morning." As I followed him inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. I had escaped, but the real challenge was still ahead of me. Mr. Harris led me into his small, cozy living room. The warmth of the space, with its soft lighting and worn furniture, was a stark contrast to the cold emptiness of my own home. He gestured for me to sit on the couch while he went to the kitchen, returning a moment later with a steaming cup of tea. "Drink this," he said, handing it to me. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. The silence between us was heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of safety, however fragile. Mr. Harris sat down across from me, his eyes full of concern. "You don't have to go back there, you know," he said softly. "There are places that can help kids like you, places where you'll be safe." I looked down at the tea, my thoughts swirling. The idea of staying away, of never returning to that house, was both terrifying and liberating, but the fear of the unknown was almost as overwhelming as the fear of my parents. "What if they come looking for me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Harris leaned forward, his expression resolute. "They won't get the chance, I'll make sure of it. You're not alone in this anymore." His words brought a lump to my throat. I had spent so long believing that no one cared, that I was utterly alone. But here was this man, someone who had no obligation to help me, offering me a lifeline. After a long pause, I nodded. "Okay," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. "You've made a brave choice," he said. "I'll call someone in the morning who can help you get into a better situation. But for now, you should get some rest." I nodded again, exhaustion suddenly washing over me. He showed me to a small guest room, and as I lay down on the bed, I felt the weight of the past 15 years pressing down on me. But beneath that weight, there was a tiny spark of hope, a flicker of a future, where I could be free from the darkness that had shadowed my life for so long. As I drifted off to sleep, the fear and anxiety slowly ebbed away, replaced by the unfamiliar but comforting thought that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. The next morning, true to his word, Mr. Harris made the necessary calls. By the afternoon, I was on my way to a safe place with kind people who promised to help me build a new life. It wasn't easy. The road ahead was long and full of challenges. But for the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. I had found allies in unexpected places. And with their support, I began to heal, to grow, and to finally understand what it meant to be free. The years of pain and neglect had left their scars, but they didn't define me. I was more than the hurt I had endured. I was stronger, more resilient, and ready to take on whatever life had in store for me. As I looked out of the car window, the landscape rushing by, I allowed myself a small, tentative smile. The darkness was behind me now. The future was mine to shape, and I was determined to make it brighter than anything I had ever known. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and comment your favorite part.